Okay, well, we're here as friends to Reinventio friendship, or Philia, to use the Greek word,
Yeah.
which is a deeper word. That means, I think it means sacred friendship in some sense.
Yep.
And I wrote an article a long time ago about this subject, and I rewrote it. I sent it to you guys, but I think the thesis is really that friendship is not a commodity, that it's sacred, that it's a vulnerable thing, that it's risky. It's not something cheap that can be, bought and sold on social media. And so I tried to write down my article in 10 sentences, but the first sentence was, friendship is how we steal the culture. Because that sort of makes sense to me. Would you agree with that, John? Because you're the originator of that phrase.
I think so. I mean, so for me, Philia captures two terms that we should maybe try to bring into discussion together. It obviously captures it captures friendship, like you said, but the invocation of the stealing of the culture also invokes the model I was using, which was Christianity in the period of late antiquity. And then the notion I want to bring in is the Christian notion of fellowship, where fellowship, is not the same. It's not to be identified with friendship, but nor can you keep it distinct. And Philia covers both. I think Philia is the love that emerges out of and is in the care for things that are self-organizing, that are living. And so the Christian notion of fellowship was the Philia that emerged out of and sustained the body of Christ, right? The church as the body of Christ. So, and of course, bodies are self-organizing. They're autopoietic. They're self-making, living things. And so Philia, and insofar as it was associated also with wisdom, is that there's the sense of the community, like the school, right? Because Pythagoras coins the term, and he simultaneously founds a community, a school, right? So there's fellowship. Out of the school emerges, right, a kind of love, right, that it emerges out of the community, but it also sustains the community as its organizing principle, as its logos. And then it is, but it's not just self-organizing. It's like a living thing. It is directed towards something. It is the Philia for Sophia, the love of wisdom. And so I think that if we could bring that notion of fellowship, the Pythagorean Christian notion, if you'll allow me that, into Aristotle's notion of friendship as the idea of a suke in two bodies, so that the bodies get a self-organizing principle, a shared life between them, like the bodies of the people, like the people in the church.
That's wonderful.
I think there's a profound discourse that we could open up there between that Aristotelian idea and the Pythagorean Christian idea of sort of friendship, fellowship.
So fellowship is about a quest too, that's what came to my mind.
Yeah, the Fellowship of the Ring.
I'm thinking of the Fellowship of the Ring, and it's a quest. So that's another dimension of friendship which I hadn't considered.
And that's very much within the Pythagorean tradition, because for Pythagoras, you were on a quest for wisdom, literally a soul flight towards wisdom. And that's where he really gave mythological teeth to the notion of wisdom as a profound kind of self-transcendence. So the questing, I thank you for bringing that out, Andrew. That's exactly also intended in things like the Fellowship of the Ring. And so I've been thinking a lot about, Eros as the love that comes out of and nurtures emergence, Philia as the love that emerges out of and nurtures self-organization, and then agape as the love that comes from and helps sustain the way things emanate. And so I've been really playing with sort of the metaphysical correlations of the three kinds of love as well. And so that's the final thing I want to say, and then I'll let you guys respond. So I'm trying to bring the Pythagorean Christian, the Aristotelian, and then this final notion, you might call it the Neoplatonic or dialectic, of seeing Philia as the important mediation between Eros and agape. as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, I was sort of thinking that this conversation we could focus on philia, maybe, but if we bring in all three, that's okay as well, of course, because everything is very interconnected.
Well, I do want to focus on philia,
Yeah.
but what I'm saying is I think there's these three aspects to it, and I think they're all related.
Yeah.
The Aristotelian aspect, the Pythagorean Christian aspect, and what we might call the dialectic or Neoplatonic aspect of it.
Great.
I'm glad you brought in the Aristotelian notion of the shared psyche, because that's something that then is developed, I think, further developed in Christianity. Augustine, I think, uses some of the same language.
What does psyche mean? Can you tell us what psyche means?
Soul, in this sense.
Soul, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
It also it sort of covers soul and mind. It's in the word psychology.
Psyche.
Right? And it also means that
psyche.
about you, which is self-moving. So it also it's part of this self-moving, self-organizing.
So it's sort of soul and psyche mixed together as a dynamic principle of some kind.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
And that maybe too opens the door to add one more dimension to what you've just said, John, which is that to understand friendship, authentic friendship, and maybe later on we can also talk about maybe make some distinctions between authentic and inauthentic friendship, because I think that would be probably a very fruitful territory for us to venture into, because the landscape is rife with inauthentic friendship. And I think it's very important for us to qualify what we mean by that. But I think that there's a dimension of Socratic self-knowledge and the pursuit of genuine and reciprocal authentic friendship. Because authentic friendship, I think, makes manifest the realization that one cannot know without being known in return. The project of knowing and being known are conjoined projects.
Yeah.
And the conjunctive nature of those projects is something that is only realized in deep friendship, in philia.
So couldn't you put the two together then? I mean, what I'm thinking of is, sorry to interject, but maybe you can riff on this then, right? The idea that, the friends are each other's divine double, because that you get the sense of the shared psyche, because the divine double is the same psyche in two bodies or two locations, and there's an aspirational relationship to them.
Yes.
But you also get the Pythagorean quest, right? The aspirational quest between two people.
Yes, exactly. The friend becomes a symbolic thou by whom you pursue your authentic self, right? And
to whom you pursue your authentic self too, right? Because you're also affording them the same thing.
That's right. Because if I can use we often use, especially when we're talking about dialogue, we often use the fire metaphors, the metaphors of the campfire. And so maybe to reintroduce that a little bit, the light that is kindled in the virtue of friendship is the light by which you uncover yourself.
Yes.
Right. And without which you cannot uncover yourself. And so I think so understanding the project of self-knowledge almost in a meutic way of uncovering recollectively that of yourself, which is not yet known to you. There seems to be a deep necessity of friendship in the cultivation of that project. And then the other thing I might throw in too, I remember you said something actually to me, John, a long time ago. And then I read something similar, I think, in Seneca. Seneca has an epistle on friendship, and he says something quite beautiful. It's very similar to something you once said to me, and then proceeded to live out, incidentally, which is that a friend is one against whose death you stake your life.
Yeah.
And now we could think of that literally, of course, but we could also think of death as the soul's despair.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a little bit more of a helpful way of thinking about it. So I might say something like, a friend is a soul against whose despair we stake our life.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a sense in which the cultivation of a real friendship, when you're at a real friend is someone in whose fate you implicate yourself.
Yeah.
A soul in whose fate you become implicated. Well, voluntarily implicated.
And who lifts you up from despair at the same time, right?
Yes.
Yeah,
With
well,
whom
yeah.
you despair and with whom you recover
and whom
Yeah.
you also despair
therefrom.
with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's, that's so beautiful. Yeah.
So you're picking up on one of the essential features of the suke is the self-knowing, the self-caring, and then that gets extended through another person.
That's right. They become conjunctive. They become conjunctive. And that, I think that also serves maybe to connect up to the insight that in a way that friendship has that mediatory function between, the knowing and the being of oneself and the knowing and being of the world writ large,
Mm-hmm.
right? The countenance of one and the countenance of the world are reconciled or resolved in the relation of friendship.
Yeah, because so you're saying something like the friendship is where we get the second person perspective that mediates between the first and the third person perspectives.
That's
we
right, and forms the bind, and thereby forms the religio, the binding.
The vow,
yeah. And it's an interesting thing because it's always perplexed me, phenomenologically, because obviously linguistically, conceptually, we have the first and second and third person forms. That's indisputable, and we're picking up on something that has some sort of phenomenological functional basis. I get that, but like as a phenomenological exercise, it's very easy. Like if you're sitting in meditation, for example, you can adopt the first person perspective, sort of this, here, now, or you can adopt the third person's perspective, no one, nowhere, no when. But what is it you're doing when you move into the second person perspective? It's this weird stereoscopic thing where you're looking out through your eyes, but you're also looking back through the beloved other, right? And yet those are somehow fused into a unified perspective. The second person perspective is a very odd.
Right.
Like I'm trying to get us to remember before we were Reinventio the strangeness and the oddness in comparison to the first person perspective and the third person perspective. The second person perspective is very, very odd indeed. Very, very odd indeed. And I want to see how that the weirdness of the second person perspective, the way it binds the two others together. So there's a way in which it binds the first and the third person perspective, as you said, Chris. And then I want to bring back what I was saying. There's something about friendship fellowship, the way it binds us into something that takes on a life of its own, right? So a friendship isn't, there's a sense in which both people, that's the analogy to dialogos. A friendship draws people, like a friendship takes on a life of its own, and it leads both of its members, or more than two people, right? There's friendships larger than that, right? But it leads them places, like it takes on a life of its own, and that's what happened. I mean, that's the myth of the Fellowship of the Ring. They form
like the Holy Spirit. It's
yes,
right.
like the Holy Spirit.
The third, the divine double, the Holy Spirit.
Yeah,
That's right. All of these things. It brings this third element in, doesn't it? That why do you say it's weird, John? What's the weirdness? Is it just because if you could,
well,
you're not reflecting on yourself, you're this isolated, let's say, atomistic, like if you're meditating and you don't have that sense. Perhaps it becomes a sterile exercise.
It could,
and if you don't have, and also and you're just, there has to be this devotional sense, in some sense, to another principle, higher principle. It could be a person or not. Otherwise, I think you're stuck in the I-it relationship, and you don't get into the thou.
I acknowledge all of that, Andrew.
Yeah.
What I meant weird is, let me try and articulate it in terms of the grammar of our assumed metaphysics.
Okay.
First person perspective maps onto subjectivity. Third person perspective maps onto objectivity.
Mm-hmm.
What does a second person perspective map onto?
Yeah. Neither and both, and
Yeah, well, that's what I've been trying to get with this notion of transjectivity.
The transjectivity,
And so friendship is one of our most powerful ways of inhabiting and disclosing the transjectivity as something of equal standing, and I think even more primordial standing, because of the way it mediates and grounds subjectivity and objectivity. And I think because our culture, and this is one of the things I've been arguing for quite a while, right? Because our culture doesn't speak about transjectivity at all, very much. I think it is largely at its metaphysical depths incapable of speaking about the grounding of friendship.
Okay, so we have the sacred notion of friendship, which we've been explored, and then we have the profane aspect of friendship, which is, everywhere today. It's been reduced to a commodity. It's been reduced to a kind of casual notion where everybody you associate with is your friend on some level, and it's become something that people, Facebook makes billions of dollars, on this notion of friend. So can you explore those both? Can you guys explore those two aspects and the difference between them?
But I think it follows on what I was just saying.
Yeah.
I think because because we've lost the connections between friendship and fellowship, and because we've lost the metaphysical home in transjectivity for friendship, I think it's very difficult for us to get to the depths of friendship.
So friendship becomes just a casual relationship where you kind of get your rocks off with your
I think friendship,
and you're not building towards this something, or you're not creating a symphony together or something like that,
Yeah, I mean, when you don't have a grammar that takes you into ontological depth perception, you're going to degrade and default to the lowest common denominator. And what is the lowest common denominator? Well, it's human association. We associate, and we used to have more fine-grained distinctions. So I mean, I understand what Chris meant by inauthentic, but what I mean is we used to have authentic categories that were non-friendship categories. There were literally your associates,
acquaintances.
There were your acquaintances, and there were your associates, and there were your colleagues. And these were not understood to be friends, nor should they be friends. And then we got the weird sitcom thing that happened where no, everybody is your family and everybody is your friend. And it's like, well, no, I don't want that, because that removes the distinctness of friendship. I want people that are good colleagues, and I will appreciate them as good colleagues, but I don't want them to be my friend. And I want people who are my acquaintances. And we even invented a new term in modernity or recently that I thought captured another category, that you had the buddy, and the buddy isn't a friend, and that's one of our biggest mistakes. The buddy is somebody that you do fun things with. They're your buddy, like they're your hey, there's my rollerblading buddy, right? And that's fine, because again, right, we're not trying to legislate the relationships. But what we've done, again, because we lack the ontological depth perception, is all those distinctions have collapsed. And that is adulterated and confused our understanding, so that we have this, well, as you said it, this profane notion of friendship, because it is a notion that is muddied and equivocal and has lost the important intelligibility that all those distinctions gave us.
If I can be like... bring this down to something like, for men, for example, friendship is beer and football, and whereas it used to be church, in a sense, I don't go to church and I don't want to become a Christian, but I prefer the church thing to the beer and football, the alcohol and sports, thing, just almost, that's like the masculine aspect of friendship, because it's interesting, because like philia, it means brotherhood, doesn't it? Of course we should include sisterhood in the notion of
course,
not to be sexist. Yeah. But brotherhood, this notion of brotherhood is quite, has been reduced to that, or
well, yeah. I mean, I there's people that I consider, like well, before COVID, I used to do role-playing games, and you have your role-playing buddies.
Yeah.
Like you go in there and you have this fun thing, you do it together, and it's great, right? But that's it. It's organized around the pleasure of a shared activity. Mm-hmm. And of course, drinking beer with somebody at a football game is an instance of that. But that's not the same thing as like fellowship, like you're saying, when you go to church. And what happens, I mean, it's an archaic term now, but when I was growing up and in church, we used to use the term edification. like edifice, like building a building. We were engaged in the project of building each other up in the Christian life.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the things, so taking what both of you have said and maybe just viewing it from a slightly different vantage, one property that we can use to distinguish one kind from the other. First, as you said, John, that one is what we might call a real or authentic friendship. Again, not a definition, just a property, is that it is not contingent on a shared context that is then repeated and reproduced. Yes. It rather than being reproduced by a shared context, it is in and of itself reproductive of then the context in which you can share the time.
Yep.
And so to me, that gives the feeling that when we say real or authentic friendships, they do not rely on the contexture of a predetermined world to find relevance and significance. Rather, they create and unfold between themselves that shared context and world that then becomes enveloping of all other things.
Oh, that's good.
That's why when you're in the presence of a real deep friend, it truly does not matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
You can sit with them on a log in the woods, and that's enough. That's enough. And to me, that's the difference. So that's one thing. And then
Chris,
the other is that.
Pick up on that. That's really,
of course.
I find that's brilliant. I won't talk a lot. I won't say very much. I think that's brilliant. I think you've articulated and extrapolated what I was trying to convey with this idea of the love that emerges and cares for something that has a life of its own, that's self-organizing. I think what you just said there was brilliant and articulated it perfectly.
Yeah,
right.
Me too.
Right.
And also, we can bring that to the level of what I said in the beginning of culture. As well as just individual. It's like that's how we create a culture that is living rather than a culture that is just based in these dead institutional forms.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And then the second thing is that, and they're interrelated, is that I'm going to put this in scare quotes, but the real friendship is infinitely dissimilar from all other friendships.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It is incomparable to any other. It is a kind and not an instance, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is not comparable to any other, right? So, Andrew, you were talking about, you have your people that you go to the pub with and drink beer and watch football. And there is a degree to which all of those friendships are similar because of their shared context.
Yeah,
and it is the dissimilarity of that singular friendship that marks it. And if it is a kind unto itself rather than an instance of a kind of friendship, I think that also is one way of telling the difference.
But that like you said, that follows perfectly from the previous point, because if it is a thing that is autonomous, literally, it creates the nomos for itself. It creates the laws and the standards for itself. Because it is a self-making thing, a self-organizing thing with a life of its own, it's going to have that uniqueness to it, right? That's exactly. It has to be the case, I would argue. I think it's not just a related sequence. I think there's an implication, maybe even an entailment from the first point into the second point.
That's a good point. Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. Yeah, they're not just two independent properties, but they are one is implicated by the other.
Exactly.
Implied by the other, I mean to say. Yeah.
And that would then mean, right, why it's so, I mean, think about how that then goes back to your previous point. Maybe the points are, there's a constellation forming. Because insofar, I mean, I'm doing this whole course now on the nature and function of the self. And one of the functions of the self is it's supposed to pick out uniqueness, right? So insofar as I share properties with other people, those aren't the properties that pick out myself. And there's problems there with that. I'm not right, but it's some idea that in some way yourself is that about you which individuates you, and which picks you out from other persons, gives you what we call a personal identity, a biographical identity, etc., etc. And we sometimes transfer that to objects, like works of art have that kind of self, because any painting other than the original Night Watch by Rembrandt is a fraud, right? And so, right.
Because it's a
something
unique
analogous.
language, right? I mean,
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
have a deep, real friend, you generate a unique language together.
That's a great point, Andrew.
It's
Yeah,
nobody
you do.
else's language, right?
Right.
It's, you know.
And what I'm saying is that unique language feeds back into the point Chris was making about Socratic self-knowledge. It literally gives you the language by which you bespeak yourself, by which you can carve out and individuate yourself, right? In which you can, right?
So it's a unique language, but it's also the language that allows you to communicate outside of the bubble or outside.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you speak. That's why you speak more fully and more truly when you speak into the ear of your friendship.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because the ear of your friendship, right, which we might call that third entity, the spirit or the Geist, as you and I have called it, John.
Yeah.
When you speak into the ear, because its ear is more resonantly comprehending, the tenor of your speech is the breadth and the compass of your speech suddenly grows. It's the totality of its reference grows more encompassing because its capacity for comprehension is that much more. You're speaking into an entire world when you speak into an authentic friendship, and so therefore your voice, your vocality takes on a resonance. The logos takes on a resonance and is able to self-multiply in that Heraclitan way that it is not otherwise able to do. That's the fecundity of the world that's created between two authentic friends.
Right. And so what I'm saying about that is, like, I'm trying to get the sort of the resonance there. And I like, in speaking to the depths, I have to speak from my depths. And in speaking from my depths, I actually make myself into a new kind of self. And this is the way in which I think the suke is shared between two people, right? That process of self-definition is being shared in some resonant fashion between two individuals. And it's to realize, and you'll like this, Chris, because I've been reading a lot of, what's his name? The guy who wrote the book on, is it Fowler? On Dialogos as midwifery, talking about Socrates and Jesus.
Yeah, it's Stephen Fowler, right?
Yeah, Stephen Fowler. And he's done a section on Socratic irony as seen by Kierkegaard. And so there's this Kierkegaardian point about friendship is a place in which we can deeply realize, and I'm loading lots of connotation into the word realize, that the self is inherently dialogical.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, exactly. And then to riff on that and put it even just in another pithy way, John, the speaking between friends is how we learn to speak with ourselves.
Yes, exactly. And that's I was just teaching a lesson at the Saturday Sangha. We've gone through, Epicurus, who taught that the greatest virtue, of course, is friendship. And then we've moved into the Stoics and Antisthenes, coming out of Socrates. And what did you learn from Socrates? Well, I learned how to converse with myself. But he doesn't mean he means we replace that stupid babble we do in our head all day long with something like Socratic dialogue in the affordance and the aspiration to wisdom. And and that only in friendship is that possible. That speaking to the depths from the depths is like, there's something there. And like I said, I think it's unreasonable. I think it's deeply unreasonable to expect that, to have those many deep and unique, to pick up on your point, Chris, deep and unique living relationships with very many people. Yeah, that's very hard. So
you only have a few. That's the other thought I was saying. Like, you only have a few friends in the sense we're talking here.
Yeah, maybe a handful.
You can't have a lot. It's not it's a qualitative, not a quantitative thing.
Exactly.
Right?
It's marked
out.
Not
Your 5,000 friends on Facebook by any means, or it's not even just like a lot of people that you know. It's like it's a small amount of people.
And crucially, to your point, Andrew, I think, and it's not even speculative because I think I've witnessed this. I've witnessed a lot of people who are without any. Yeah. And, like, it's not, I think, I agree that I think we can only have perhaps a handful of those kinds of friends because of how much air they take.
Sort of suicide,
rightly,
isn't it? When you say they have very few, I think I felt that's just so tragic. That's the suicide of being.
It is. Oh, that's a great way of putting it. That's exactly. I think that's true.
When you abandon all friends and you're just this, ship adrift somewhere, before watching your computer screen, and it's.
Well, I mean, that goes back to Chris's point about the person that you stake, your life against their death, against their despair. I just finished reading with a good friend of mine, Dan Chappie, The Plague by Camus, and running through it. I mean, the character. He told me the character he identified me with, and then he was reading ahead of me, and I sort of accepted. It identifies me with Theroux, and Theroux's project. I've sort of seen that is my way of calling my project. Theroux's thing is he wants to learn how to be a saint without God, and that's literally the phrase he uses. But what you see in The Plague, and The Plague, of course, is this. I think it's the book that helped Camus win the Nobel Prize, right? It's a beautiful book, masterpiece. In some ways, I think it's a better book than The Stranger. But in the plague, of course, there's a French. It's so apropos of right now. There's a French town. It's overwhelmed by plague. They lock down. They go into quarantine, etc. And of course, it's a metaphor for human beings confronting absurdity and mortality, and that. But what you see in it is exactly that. You see the friendships between like Rieu and Theroux and some of the other. The friendship is the thing that it's amazing because Camus writes it so beautifully. He doesn't write it romantically. He doesn't. But what he shows that the friendships, that's the locus, that which calls to us and calls to us from another's depth and calls to us from our depth in a way that preserves our humanity against whatever. I mean, this sounds trite, but against whatever the universe can sort of throw at it. I mean, that's the point. Like when I hear about some of the friendships that were maintained in some of the deepest, darkest situations, like in POW camps and things like that, and how those friendships helped people preserve their humanity when nothing else does. Heroic individualism and all that stuff, that all gets broken. That all gets broken. But the one thing that undermines it, the one thing that is not undermined is friendship. It's telling that in 1984, Orwell gets this, because what he does, the most horrific thing he does, is he ultimately undermines the relationship and the friendship between Winston and Julia. And that's when they lose their soul. That's when they lose their soul.
Yeah, that's when he loves Big Brother. He loves the it instead of the thou. He's
right. He loses, and that's the whole point of the party. If you read the book, you realize the whole point of the party is to absolutely destroy the possibility of friendship and fellowship, so that the only thing that's left is the devotion to Big Brother. And the market and the state are trying to do that right now. Yeah. And that's what you're pointing to, Andrew. That's what you're pointing to.
Yeah. It also occurs to me that I had a couple thoughts while you were talking. One is that this kind of friendship is not necessarily temporal. Like you could have friends from books, or you could have friends that have passed away, or that you no longer talk to, or you can cultivate friends in all kinds of places. That you could be alone, and maybe at times solitude is more of a place to cultivate generous, genuine friendship than in the crowd.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and also that it also seems that there's something about those kinds of friendships that are also both voluntary and involuntary simultaneously. I think that it's important to understand that too.
Yeah. It's Frankfurt's voluntary necessity.
Voluntary necessity.
Love is always a voluntary necessity.
That's right. That's right.
Once you enter into it, you find that you couldn't be without it. Right?
Well, because then suddenly you live in a world in which it is presupposed.
Yes, exactly.
And once you live in a world in which that friendship is presupposed, it cannot be discarded, right? Because it becomes a fundament of your being as such. I use those terms deliberately, right?
Yeah.
Your being as such begins to depend upon it. And it's not something that you can hasten into. You can't rush into it, and you also can't contrive it. That's the other thing. I think sometimes people think, there's something formulaic about people when they have convergent interests and perhaps personalities that would seem by all psychometric criteria to be compatible. And you know what? Sometimes
problem
it
with
just
dating
does not
sites,
work.
right?
And that's not to romanticize it necessarily, but there is and must be deep mystery within the emergence of authentic friendship. Some of it has to remain mysterious, must always remain mysterious.
I like that.
And
I like the fact that you're pointing out the involuntary aspect of it. The fact that's why you fall in love. And this, I wonder if you fall in love, that's actually philia, not eros, in the sense that you, on some level, because you develop a bond with the person, a creative bond with the person that endures through time, and it's not merely an erotic thing. It's something. It develops more from eros into philia or something like that. Are you following my?
Yeah. Well, Plato talks
yes.
Plato talks about a shift within eros itself. He talks about like there's a kind of eros that's the consumptive eros. So right, you want to be one with something and you consume it.
Yeah.
Right, and then he talks about that it can flip, and you can get this move where eros goes from being consumptive eros to being generative eros. And he says he gives the prototypical example of encountering beauty and wanting to make more beauty. You don't want to consume the beauty so it disappears into you. That's not the direction. The direction is the other way. You want to make more beauty in response to the beauty you've seen. And then he indicates that is preparing you for the philia in the Socratic relationship.
Yeah, and that's why you could be married for a long time, right? Because you keep going with that creation of beauty. It doesn't end somewhere along the way. I'm sorry. I was just thinking that the essence of the husband-wife relationship, right, is really about that. As we're talking about friendship, but it's also the essence of the husband-wife relationship.
I think
because you say your wife is your best friend or that, and the reason you don't leave this person because there's so many other options is because you've gone beyond that state where you can continue to create this beauty that you're talking about, or which isn't necessarily something so tangible, and it's also a unique language as we've been talking about, right?
I think so. I think the spousal relationship is different from friendship, not because of absence, but because of excess. I think the spousal relationship should have all three loves, at least the generative form of eros, definitely philia in both the friendship and fellowship sense, but also agape. There's a sense in which you're helping to midwife, you're helping to give birth to that person's aspirational self. There's a sense in which you're engaged in the love of creativity, and of course the problem with that with an adult, right, is to not do that in any way that's patronizing or condescending. So it's precisely, I think, the eros and the philia that counterbalance that that pretentious, patronizing aspect, the danger at least of agape. But I think it's also agape that makes sure that the eros doesn't become consumptive. And I think what is mediating between all of them and keeping them going, like you said, Andrew, is philia. And so if you look at sort of the measures of long-term relationship, the philia tends to be central, but especially for long-term relationships, there's an agapic element into it. Like Chris said, the agapic element is you help, like you're a world through which you give birth to a world through which the other person can come into who and what they are. Or to use it another way, Andrew, there's an agape in creating a unique language by which that other person can come into articulation. So I think all of them. I hesitate to speak like I have any authority about this because I'm in such a relationship now, but trying to get relationships to last a lifetime is not something yet I've succeeded in. So I have to bow to your expertise on this. But from what I've seen and from what I've observed and from what I have good reason to believe I'm now participating in, and from the research I've looked at this, I think if you have all three, and they shift around in what is prominent at any one stage in the relationship, right? There's periods where the erotic aspect can come to the fore, or the friendship aspect, or the agapic aspect.
Sure. Yeah.
And I think again, the degree to which, if that argument is right and they're interpenetrating, the degree to which we have denuded right? And diminished friendship is the degree to which the other two are also denuded and diminished. And the way they all relate to each other is also denuded and diminished. I think it's no coincidence that the people that only have, Facebook friends have a tremendous difficulty having committed romantic relationships. That's not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
There's also something kind of interesting in the, incidentally, before I say this, all of this serves to depict what is at stake in the loss of friendship. Mm-hmm. I know for myself, the quaking of that foundation, the prospect of the loss of a friendship of that nature and of that intensity. I can't speak to the spousal relationship, but if I can return it momentarily to the philia of friendship, the loss of which, to me, is it brings a kind of existential stress that, in my experience, very, very few things can compare.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Because when your life begins to presuppose that foundation and begins to presuppose the reproduction from the worlds that are opened by those friendships, the risk of the loss of those worlds is tantamount to the risk of the loss of soul. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. To bring it back to despair for a moment.
It's funny.
And that's why it is such a seismic threat, at least in my mind and experience, when, even if there's no real imminent threat of the loss thereof, if there's even a sort of a real disruption to the foundation of those worlds, I think the consequences, the existential consequences of that and the fallout from that can be incredibly pernicious and deleterious to the lived life. And understanding those stakes, I think, is very, very important to the treatment of those friendships, because it helps to make sure that in treating those friendships, you are not treating them as mere, we're treating them duly as the worlds they are. And often, sometimes too, friendships, to take your point about the consumptive eros, John, and how, the difference between the consumptive eros and the generative eros, that very difference often is the difference that makes for a barren world or a fruitful world in the soil of that friendship. I've hit moments in my life where I've realized that a friend whom I cherished very deeply was in fact what was driving the need I had that drove my pursuit of that friendship was of a consumptive erotic nature. And of course I mean erotic in the broader sense, not in the sexual sense, right? Yeah. But there was a consumptive eros that was actually an unconscious determinant of the relevance of that friendship to me. Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, many of us
have that experience. Isn't that interesting? Like everybody goes through that. It's like
we have to
threshold that you have to go through. And
yes,
I discovered this poem I wrote a long time ago for a woman, and it was just this barrage of sex and death and every kind of melodrama you can even imagine. It was just like pouring out of my unconsciousness, and we all go through that, right? And then it's like the romantic has to die or something. I don't know.
That's right. It's like that need, whatever it is, that consumptive erotic need that can sometimes move friendships with a force that goes unseen to you has to be made opaque. It has, right? It's the transparency, opacity shift that has to happen. You have to become conscious and aware. That's why it's meieutic, and sometimes you have to become conscious of the nature of your need and how rapacious it is. Yeah. And then sometimes in so doing, it's almost like a sacramental process in so doing, a friendship and the potential of a friendship can be renewed in that process. It doesn't necessarily mean the death of a friendship. It can actually mean the renewal of a friendship and the reopening of the friendship back into the mode of I thou. Yeah. And when that happens, I find, especially if it's requited, it is such a profound experience.
Yeah, and I was thinking that friendship is also in stages. When you were talking, I thought of like the period when things become translucent or transparent is when you become an adult on some level. So yeah. It's like becoming a mature friend. There's an evolution to friendship. It's not a thing.
Yes.
Uh-huh. I was thinking, Chris, as you were talking, I was thinking about, because we often we've talked about the mythos around these perennial patterns. I was thinking about the vampire myth, as opposed to the zombie myth is the myth of what we've argued with Philip, the myth of the meaning crisis. Mm-hmm. But the vampire myth strikes me as a really appropriate myth of, especially because of all the perversions of Christian fellowship that are within the vampire, because the vampire is someone who sucks the life out of you, right? And the consumptive hunger is insatiable, not in the same way, not in the mindless way of the zombie, but in the way in which it is. I mean, vampires are sort of the quintessential narcissists, right? That everything is and that's why they literally have the power of drawing attention, right? The Bela Lugosi example is famous for that. And then I wonder if that's the case, that the vampire represents how we can deeply betray Philia. The fact that we have gone through this cultural movement of making the vampire sexy and fun, isn't that maybe a way in which our culture is unconsciously indicating what we've been talking about here, that it has lost the understanding of friendship because it's lost the horror of the vampire. Being a vampire is cool. You get to live for a long time and all that, right? And it's like, no, you don't understand it.
The vampires are all 20-somethings now, which is sort of the age of narcissism, right? When you're in your 20s, you're kind of like, you're self-obsessed. You haven't learned to, develop, you haven't had enough relationships to know what it means to, develop. I mean, not always.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, Andrew. I hadn't thought about that. That's even in one of those horrible books by Anne Rice, but the idea of the perpetual, the immortality is also a perpetual immaturity. The vampire,
young.
Yeah. The sorry, what did you say, Chris?
Forever young. The forever young.
Yeah. The vampire.
So maybe the Little Prince or the Peter Pan myth and the vampire myth, they're coming together.
Yeah.
Adolescent and. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And the forever young, pairing the forever young with the living death is an interesting pairing, John.
Yeah. It's definitely sells a lot of TV shows on.
And so, so the youth obsession of our culture, and the trivialization that Han talks about so much in The Agony of Eros and The Scent of Time and Saving Beauty. I mean, right? All of that, the perpetual immaturity of our culture. That would also feed into your point, Andrew, and also help another loop explaining why friendship is so radically trivialized in our culture. Because the 20-something is supposed to be when you're moving from buddies to the real possibility of friendship. Mm-hmm. But if you're always in that liminal place, and if you're always, what you're trying to do is get whatever you can from it, the vampire, then of course you're going to be perpetually incapable of friendship. That's a really horrific thought. Yeah. What would it be like? What would it be like to be psychologically set? Your character is so malformed that real friendship, the friendship that creates these, what we said, this unique language where we're not just communicating, where we're communing with each other. What would it be like to not be capable of that? What would that be like? I mean, I don't know what that's like.
I think it's a kind of perennial starvation. Like, that's how I think about it.
Sorry, Andrew, I didn't hear.
Well, I said it's a living death.
Yeah.
It's you're one of the undead.
Yeah.
You know, really, because there's just nothing. It's your whole movie. Your life is a Friends sitcom. It's like it's horror. You know.
Yeah, because it's you're. I think of the image of I think of the satanic image at the bottom of Dante's Inferno,
Right.
the flapping of the wings, right? The striving, but the modally confused striving is precisely what recreates the conditions of incarceration, right?
Yeah.
As he flaps his wings, he cools the world and keeps himself encased in ice. And I think that state is something akin to that. It's like the consumptive and rapacious form of eros that drives people to want to collect and consume one another is the very thing that keeps them perennially fixed and motionless, really, insofar as they can't, incapable of the kind of self-transcendence that would have them, again, know and be known in proper reciprocity with another person.
So that knowing and being known, I mean, that's the deep relationship then between Philia, dialogos, and the cultivation of wisdom, right? If you can't enter into Philia, if you can't commune, then you're not going to have dialogos. You're not going to have these conversations that take on a life of their own and give birth to new ways of seeing and being. And without that, then the possibility of knowing yourself virtuously, because when you know yourself, to know yourself virtually, Chris, I think you even made this pun in one of the things you wrote. To know yourself virtuously is to know yourself in virtue of others, right? There's an inherent binding there together, and so without Philia, there's no dialogos, and there is no capacity for that kind of knowledge, the self-knowledge that makes us wise. So instead, what you do then,
yes.
right? You gather the likes, you gather the connections, and you don't have any aspirational self-knowledge. You don't have any Socratic self-knowledge. You fill it up with narcissistic autobiography because that hole there is also missing. And so what you do is you're posting all the pictures, right? And you're doing all the things on Instagram, and you're constantly...
So it's sort of attention economy.
Yes, exactly. And all you're doing is constantly running the autobiography.
Yes. Except the autobiography remains literal autobiography, because one of the things, and as opposed to, you know what that. So you know how when you have a friendship, an authentic friendship that you've had for a very long time, shared autobiography becomes a way, or shared memory, if I can put it that way, using it in the Augustinian sense of memory.
Yeah.
The memory becomes a world in which to play through. The shared memory, the commons of the shared memory, becomes a world in which to make yourselves more mutually known, rather than simply to trace over journeys undertaken. The tracing over journeys undertaken actually becomes a way of co-mapping your sort of expanding reference for one another.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I'm struggling to get this one out a little bit, but that and I guess what I'm trying to say is that the reliving of shared memory has to be a symbolic exercise rather than a literal exercise.
Totally. It's the memory of sati. It's not the memory of chronology. It's the memory that brings mindfulness of the deep remembering of who and what we can be. It's an ontological remembering.
It's an ontological memory,
rather than historical remembering.
That's right. It's the vertical. Exactly. It's vertical rather than horizontal.
That's what Proust's whole opus was all about, really, wasn't it? It was writing down in minute detail the beingness that he had experienced in his life and transforming that. Transforming that into meaning and instead of triviality or.
Yeah. You're talking about the remembrance of things past.
The remembrance of things past,
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Andrew. I think that's exactly right. I think,
which is why it's such a profound novel, right?
Exactly. It's almost like a parable. Parables are things that look like narratives, but actually undermine narrative from within, right? Because what they do is they dislodge you from that horizontal autobiography and they set you into the ontology. So like the parable of the prodigal son is, right, like I said this before, that there's the tension between justice and compassion and between the father, the role of the father and the role of the elder son and the role of the younger son. And if you try to resolve it in terms of any one of these things in favor of any one of them, you lose your humanity. Well, justice should always triumph. No. Compassion should always triumph. No. The father should always teach. No. The elder son should. No. The point is, and that's what Jesus is doing. And then he says, though, this, he does the typical Jesus thing. And the kingdom of God is like this. And you go, right? So you get this, right? But Proust is like that too, because what happens is you know, Swann's Way and all this. You're reading what sounds like an autobiography, but you realize, like you said, Andrew, you realize, no, wait, the bottom drops out, and I'm not really moving this way. I'm moving this way. Like he's exploring the depths of humanity. I had a similar experience when I read The Great Gatsby, right? I'm reading The Great Gatsby, and I'm reading this book, and I'm kind of frustrated with it, and I'm going along, and I'm thinking, what is it? Why is this book famous?
Yeah, me too. I thought it was kind of boring.
It's like, here's a story, this love story. This is like, it's just this it's just these biographies unfolding about these indulgent people, and then you get to the last 5 pages of the book, and it goes, and you go, oh my gosh, he hasn't been talking about these people at all. He's been talking about the American dream, and he's been talking about the collapse of the American dream and the corrupting us, and you get that drop into the vertical.
Drop into the vertical. Yeah.
And so here's another pithy way of putting it: friends are ways they share and they afford the dropping into the vertical for each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is why I was going to say, one of the things I wrote down was that there's a risk involved in friendship, because you can lose a friend. Like and also a friend is not something that it's not a smooth operation, to use Hans' language. It's something that challenges you. Very deep.
It's a labor. To go back to the midwifery metaphor. It's a labor.
And so I guess that's why it's sacred again, but I guess that's why it's also a journey, and I guess that's why it's also hard, difficult. You know, it can be a trial sometimes. Well,
every relationship ends in loss, right? Every relationship ends in loss, and this is where, if you take a look at, because I've been teaching all of them recently. Our understanding of Epicureanism is totally off. Epicureanism, it's about philosophical contemplative companionship. That's at the heart of Epicureanism, and then of course within Stoicism as well. And they both venerate friendship profoundly and deeply, but they always do it in the recognition. That's what I meant about. That's why I was invoking Camus' The Plague. Because every relationship ends in loss. Either the relationship is betrayed or damaged irreparably, or the person dies, right? And so the Stoics actually, the premeditatio, you're always supposed to remind yourself, sati, that every friendship is subject to fatality in that way. Everything, even relationship to objects. But the point is not to stop because of it, right? Yeah. The point is not to say, well, I'm not. The point is not, I'm going to pack up my emotional toys and go home. The point is not. It's precisely the opposite. It's to see. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just thinking that the opposite is also true. Is this: the friend remains with you always until you die. If it's a deep friendship, it never leaves. So it's both those things are true.
Yes, they are. Yeah. They are, and that's the point. And
even if you have an antagonistic relationship with this person and you break up, or they're still working inside of you on some level, and they're still having their effect on you. You can't escape from a real friend. I don't think. I think there's no.
No, you can't. You can't. And actually, that's almost very crucial. It's almost very crucial to the real friendship.
The responsibility is there whether you decide to take it up or not. Right.
Yeah. It's been my experience that once you love somebody, and love, not lust or acquaintance or care, once you love somebody, you always love them to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, and even in grief, whether it's the grief of rejection or the grief of loss, right? You still love the person, but it's interesting. The whole, if you didn't love them, it wouldn't hurt, right? That's the point.
And also, you might even hate them as well in some level. Like you might have hate for them, you know, and what happened. You might still have that, but that doesn't take that away either. I mean, hate is.
So the interesting thing about it is, so what I was going to say, not that you interrupted me, Andrew, is
hey guys.
Sorry, Angie, you dropped out for a second.
I had a bit of a latency problem. The last thing I heard you say was Jordan Peterson.
Okay, so let me make the point. I said invoking Jordan Peterson is like invoking Voldemort. But what he made a point, and it's not his insight, but he made it famous, that meaning, what I would call meaning in life, is what sustains you when you're not happy, when you're not cheerful, when you're not content. And what I was suggesting was that friendship is the tutorial for that. Friendship is where we get the lived sense of it being worth it, even though there is going to be loss, even though there's going to be conflict. We get a deep. And so in the Epicureans and the Stoics, you get the sense of friendship as where you get, and I want to break this word up to emphasize it, where you get encouragement, because courage isn't just fortitude. Courage is a sense of the meaning of life that sustains you even when things are going horribly. And friendship is the place where the Stoics, and especially the Epicureans, thought we practiced that. We thought, well, and you have something similar in Buddhism, Andrew. You have the Buddha and the Dharma need the Sangha. You have the Buddha and the Dharma need the Sangha. And so I think that the degree also which...
And you have the spiritual friend, I think it's called, who you can't really go very far without that.
You can't. And that's what you see also again in the plague. And so again, I think, and we don't talk enough about this virtue. I mean, we've fallen into a maniacal monologue about justice, not even internal justice, just social justice. Social justice is important. It really is. But justice and sophronism have to be talked about, and so does courage. And the degree to which people are not capable, I'm going to make a prediction here. It's something I think we could actually test. I think the degree to which people are incapable of friendship, of a communing relationship, the kind we've been talking about here, is the degree to which they are not going to get practice in existential encouragement, the courage to be, the defense against despair, and therefore they are existential cowards. That's a prediction I'm going to make.
Yeah, or the degree to which they're merciful on some level, right? I mean,
but those go together. Cowardice and cruelty. Cowardice and cruelty are deeply interwoven and bound together.
Yeah,
they're deep. Cruelty always comes out of tremendous insecurity. That's why you see the cruelty of people like Trump. Because he is such a fundamental coward, right? That's also why he's incapable of real friendship, right? That's why you see the cruelty that he sort of espouses without giving it a second thought, because those are bound together. Insecurity and cowardice, right, and cruelty are always bound together.
Yeah. Well, it just occurred to me that justice, right? This idea of justice, without that sense of understanding what philia and friendship is about, would lead you to be unmerciful and cruel and shallow and you know.
So it's, you know, there was a song by Three Dog Night which really dates me.
Really dates you.
Chris doesn't even know who I'm talking about, but you do, Andrew.
I've heard it. I don't know if I know the songs, but
well, there was a song called, it's easy to be hard, and then there's actually a line in here about, people who care about justice, but and the line is that they care about justice, but as you said, they're incapable of actual friendship with each other. And I think the attempt to sever justice from fellowship and even a sense of commonwealth,
and ideology becomes the substitute, doesn't it? Like
yes.
a negative,
the having of shared beliefs Basically, we become propositional buddies.
Yeah.
That song,
and there's a venomance behind it, and a which arises with it. That is, it's where I guess where the scapegoat thing mechanism kind of comes into being, where you want to, I don't know, you want to join together with somebody and destroy something rather than join together with somebody and create. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it's just group vampires, right?
Yeah.
It's
group vampires.
Yeah, the mob mentality kind of thing. And we can mob together with our words as much as we can mob together with our actions, and that's problematic. That's why, again, I think the myths. There's a reason why things. There's many mythic elements in things like Tolkien, but the Fellowship of the Ring is a myth that's running all the way through, and I think the profound attraction for that is, for many people, it awakens and it helps them sati to remember how much they need friendship, how much they need it.
Yeah.
Because friendship in and of itself is like, it's like within the suffering of life.
Wow, that's beautiful. Say that again.
Friendship cocoons the memory of the eternal within the intrinsic suffering of life.
That's it.
So that's Sam and Frodo on the mountain with all this, the world is collapsing around them.
That scene,
but that's very beautiful, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Exactly. That was beautifully said, Chris.
Well, it was just taking all that you two just said and just trying to synthesize it in a sense. Yeah, and that's why expressions of the Sam and Frodo example is so canonical for a good reason. It's incredibly moving. I've never ceased to be moved by it for precisely that reason, because it's like a pure distillation of that insight.
And maybe the Harry Potter books are sort of the opposite. In a sense, the friendships there are all about rebelling against the adult world or something like that. Or maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert.
No, I think there is authentic friendship in that story, but I don't think that the friendship is as central to the story as it is in Lord of the Rings, because Harry Potter is a messianic story. It's a messianic story. It's the death and resurrection of Christ, basically. Yeah. That's essentially what Harry Potter is, and that's why it's so beloved, because it's a very, very thinly disguised story of Christ.
But I still wonder if it's beloved for the wrong reasons at times. In the way that like what we're talking about is these little groups of people playing Quidditch with each other, and they're sort of like that. It reflects the superficial aspect, right? Doesn't have this sacred quality that Lord of the Rings does.
Yeah, I think I think Chris's point is the friendships aren't as pivotal because the story is about Harry Potter and how he's a messianic figure. So it's basically Jesus and his disciples. Whereas in the Lord of the Rings, the superpower of the hobbits is friendship. That's what people don't get. Everybody else has fantastic abilities, but the superpower of the hobbits is friendship. It's friendship that time and time again preserves them against the temptation to evil. Again, it's their friendship, and the Shire, right? It's that, and the Shire isn't a nationalism. It's again that sense of fellowship, right? And the
Shire is a village. It's a village, and it's
yes, exactly.
It's what the kind of communities I think that we're sort of, trying to create in the wake of the collapse of civilization. Right?
Yes. The smart village
book is about, right?
Yeah. The smart villages, future thinkers, the Civium of Jordan Hall. It's all about trying to get that back. But the idea is what makes the hobbits the beings that have the ultimate courage. There's other heroic figures. There's Gandalf, there's Aragorn, but the only ones that have the courage to the end. For me, the scene is when Sam lifts Frodo up because he can't walk anymore, and he carries Frodo. two, right?
Yeah.
Into the heart of
it's the fulcrum moment of the entire story, I think.
Yeah.
For good reason.
Yeah, very much. Very much.
Yeah.
And again, it comes back to your point, Chris. He literally bears Frodo up against despair.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
I should head out, guys. I think that's a good place to bring it to an end. I think that's a very good image to circle around to. But my time is pretty much up.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time. I see you're incredibly, active and busy with talking to a lot of people, and so I appreciate you taking the time.
But I want to do this again, Andrew. I find all of these Reinventio sessions.
Yeah, and I'm gonna rename. Like I put them out as reinventing because I thought Reinventio would just kind of sound weird and people wouldn't get it. But then people have been writing me and saying, "What do you mean reinvent? You can't reinvent these things. It's not right." So it should be Reinventio. So I'm gonna rebrand our discussion as Reinventio. And I thought that maybe because I really love the subject of friendship, that the next thing we could, if we dared to, talk about the erotic or the aspect of friendship and love another time or the next time. If
I'd be happy to take that.
Yeah,
on.
let's do that. There's so much more to say about this.
Yeah, there's an endless amount of things to say, I think. But
I would like to explore also the proposal, which has fallen off our cultural table, but it goes back to perhaps Jesus of Nazareth. It's definitely in Paul. It's definitely in Augustine and in Aquinas, of love as a virtue.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to really explore that, because the idea we have. I was talking about this in the Sangha this morning, right? How much we have lost, how much we perverted the sense of the word passion, right? We do things with passion, and we use this word, not realizing that the word passion is related to passive, and the Greek word is pathe, from which we get pathetic. Passion is the opposite of action. And we think somehow that the intensity of feeling is what keeps people committed. We look because what we're actually valuing is people's ability to commit to an arduous or long-standing task. You can't do anything without passion. What you're saying is you need commitment. But the ancient idea is what feelings are ephemeral, no matter how intense they are, right? What keeps people committed is a power for committing to the good, which is exactly what virtue is. Virtue is the power of committing to the good.
Wow.
And so to my mind, I was comparing the intensity of infatuation, I use this as an example, with what you were talking about earlier, Andrew, the virtue of that empowers you and encourages you to stay in a long-term relationship. And that's not an intense feeling, it's a virtue. So I would like next time, if possible, to talk about love as a virtue.
Love is a virtue, sure. Sounds great. And that's another thing to reinvent, right? Passion, yeah, wow. Love is a virtue because it means, like so many of these things, we're living in a time of inversion where the thing we think it means is actually almost its opposite, right?
Exactly. And you're right to note that and this is Jonathan Pajot's point about we live in the topsy-turvy world. We live in clown world. We live in the upside down world.
The upside
which
down
he
world
says is always predictive of the end of an epoch, end of a civilization.
Uh-huh.
It speaks of an imminent death on large scale when all these things have gone through some major inversion. Yeah, I think talking about love as a virtue and talking about the inverting of it's almost like Frodo and Sam, like the end of all things, the inversion of all things. Let's talk about both of those. Let's talk about love as a virtue and the inversion of all things.
And the inversion of all things. Okay, I'll write it down here. Okay. Very good. Very good.
Sounds like a plan.
Thank you so much. I love these conversations just to death. It just
Yep.
It's
Exactly.
so great.
I love them too. I think they're life-giving.
Exactly.
They certainly are. Thank you, Andrew. John, of course. Both of you.
Yep. Both
Thank
of you
guys. Good night then.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.